It's rock and roll!
Welcome to the Look It's Rock and Roll podcast. I'm your host, Julian Gill. Today we've got the gang back together. Lonnie, St. Louis, Kiss. Actually, we're not on the Kiss board, so I don't have to say your nicknames. Lonnie.
Hello.
Mark. And Ken. What news? I'm just going to give you some quick news since this isn't the Kiss podcast. I get to pimp this. July the 28th, I'm going to Boston and New Hampshire to finish up work on it in the next week. I've just finished 2 weeks of straight editing daily, hardcore. Someone saying to me, you don't need that. You're not saying that clearly. You've already said that. Get rid of that. Get rid of this. And it's really tightened up the narrative sections a lot. Absolute value to have someone who actually knows what they're doing telling me when I don't know what I'm doing, which is, what it's all about to make it better for anyone who is interested in that. So getting there. Nearly there. Oh, God. Nearly there. All right. So today, where are we? We are up the irons. We are going to be talking about the first Iron Maiden album on this show, which is, everyone got your copies? There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere in time. Come on, Ken, get with the program.
See? I got it.
Fancy pants. 180 gram.
You.
I bet it's 180 gram vinyl, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
But you know what? I have a fancier one. You know what one I have?
Which one?
What's that?
Blue vinyl?
This here. No, this one here. If you look at the label
Covered?
here, the top. No, this is a pressing from Russia. Now, why is this so special?
Tell us.
Because this pressing was done using the original UK stampers. Because EMI sent them the original stampers to the company in Russia. Because this is a license. This is not a bootleg. This is an officially licensed record. And so they got the stampers from them. So essentially, instead of paying like $80 to buy a UK first pressing, you can pay like what I paid, like $25 for this, and get a UK first pressing. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same pressing, and the serial numbers are the same. The matrix is the same. It's the exact same thing, except it was just pressed in Russia. And I listened to it.
The wax they used was radioactive from Chernobyl, though.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, then they should use it more often.
Is it glow in the dark?
No, but you should use it more often because it sounds better than any of the other pressings of this record that I've had. So maybe they should start using radioactive material for it.
Right.
So I got this one,
That's
and
cool.
just to show the nerdness of my collecting, I also have my late '90s CD reissue and my early remaster reissue that just came out just recently. So
You don't like Iron Maiden.
nah, they're all right, I guess.
Well, everyone knows the history of Iron Maiden, so Somewhere in Time was the band's sixth studio album. It was released in September 1986. Like some other albums that came out around the same time, I'm thinking notably Judas Priest and Turbo. They did a shift to the synthy, changing from pure guitar sonics into trying to become a little bit more, I don't want to say mainstream, but maybe accessible. But on this album, we see Iron Maiden really embracing their progressive tendencies and going all in with that style. I consider this a concept album, but I also want to preface this whole episode with a disclaimer. This is my favorite Iron Maiden album. It is my go-to Iron Maiden album. It always has been since the day it was released. So, Mark, this was your pick. You decided that we were going to talk about this one, and I'm glad that you did, but tell us why.
Well, Iron Maiden has always been a huge influence on me, guitar playing wise, songwriting wise. Just their album artwork has always been something that I found extremely fascinating, even as a young kid. And like you, this album had a huge impact on me. It wasn't my first introduction to Iron Maiden. I'll get to that later when we get to that point. But it was really the first album that I remember buying with my own pocket money, like for doing chores and stuff like that when I was younger, and it was one of those moments where I put it on and was just captivated by what I heard. I mean, I was still a little, I guess, young to understand that they had a really heavier, sort of punkier edge at the beginning of their career, because this was probably one of the first records I got from them. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the first ones. So I didn't go in with that sort of framework where I was like, oh man, it's not as cool as Number of the Beast, and how some other people kind of approach it. So I really love this album. I don't think there's a bad song on this album. We'll get to that later, but for me, it was a no-brainer to pick this one.
Nice. Lonnie, what about you? When did you
First
first
album you
learn?
bought, first Iron Maiden album you bought with your own money, or first album period you bought with your own money, Mark?
No, the first Iron Maiden.
First Iron Maiden. Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious. For me, I had a later introduction to Maiden. I was always aware of Iron Maiden, but it's not exactly radio friendly. So I never really bought an Iron Maiden album. I knew of them. I knew of, of the hits and that. And it wasn't until 2004 I read Chuck Klosterman's Fargo Rock City. And that turned me on to a wide variety of unexplored metal bands I had never gotten into. I read that and I'm like, why don't I have an Iron Maiden CD? From my taste in music from that genre, it's really kind of silly that I don't. So I went and bought just a greatest hits, just so and that's what you do. You go and buy a greatest hits just to introduce yourself to the band. Well, do I like it? Is it worth me exploring further? And it was, and this was the go, and this album was actually the go-to after that. And I love the album. It's fantastic from start to finish. And we'll get into it that it was difficult to pick favorites, and it's difficult to pick least favorites. And I think that's what really describes a great album, when it's hard to pick your favorites. Hard to pick out a couple that you like above the rest, and it's hard to pick out a couple that you don't like. So, it's like, you can name a couple albums, like Appetite or something like that. I just love everything from start to finish. It's up there with that.
Nice. Well, Ken, I'm almost embarrassed to ask you when you first learned about Iron Maiden, and were you aware of the band and the release of this album in 1986?
I think I was aware of it, of course, but I think the very first Iron Maiden album came out, but I didn't do anything with that. But I did get, before this one at least, I did get Peace of Mind and Number of the Beast, and I had Power Slave, which is the album before this one. So I did have those few. I really enjoyed all those. But about this time, my first son was almost going to be born soon. So I started, my priorities were changing as far as music. I wasn't doing as much buying of music as I was before, and things like that. But I still knew what was going on. I remember when some of the songs came out, that sort of thing. But I don't think I'm pretty sure I didn't buy this album. This is one I kind of stopped at Power Slave, and then I just completely stopped pretty much until later years, of course. But I knew them. I knew they were, a very good band, great band. I enjoyed it. Really loved Power Slave. That might be my favorite one by them. But yeah, this one turned out to be actually a pleasant surprise. So, and you talked about the other bands like Judas Priest. I remember I did have Turbo. I remember that. And I know the Scorpions did one too, like that too. And which I didn't care for so much when they did a synth guitar type thing. But I think it worked better for Iron Maiden. So anyway, yeah, I was aware of Iron Maiden, and I had them, a few of their albums at that time.
Yeah, so I knew it was coming out. I was into the band by that time. I got into the band with Live After Death, obviously with 85 being my general entry point to most things. So I'd gone back and gotten Power Slave by the time this came out. This was my first new Iron Maiden album. And then over the next few years, I'd go back and get, I mean, it wasn't until 87 that I got Killers and, really got into the Diano era. So I was into it. I was waiting for it. And when it came out, wow. I just remember everyone picking up guitars and trying to figure out the riffs to the first single because that was just what everyone did. But 86, that was a great year for me for music because you had, what was it, Eat 'em and Smile came out. You had Mechanical Resonance from Tesla, which to this date, Lonnie says Appetite for Destruction. I say I've got Mechanical Resonance, for the year, basically the year before. It was just solid end-to-end album. So, yeah, very much aware of it. Mark.
Well, for me, are we talking about entry point, I guess? So for me, as far as the first Maiden thing that I ever got, in my introduction to Maiden is the same as Julian. It was Live After Death. What ended up happening is, of course, the stories I'm sure people who listen to our podcast are very familiar with. My older sister Jane, once again, came to the rescue, and one time I was at home and she said, "Mark, I got you something." Boom, she dropped Live After Death in my lap, much to my parents' sort of like, when they saw it, I'll say this. I opened it, I saw the pictures in there, and I pulled out that little booklet that came with it, and I was immediately captivated, mainly because I started playing guitar already by that point. I was like really freshly into guitar at that point. So when I saw all these little tidbits, like the band used 1,000 packs of guitar strings, 500 guitar picks. They did all this kind of like little informational bits in there, and I was like all like captivated by it. I was like, wow, touring must be amazing. I was so young then, right? But that album just captured my imagination. When I listened to it and put it on, I was like, wow, it was like a greatest hits album, obviously, just live, right? They played all these fantastic songs on there. And of course, once I heard them, and later on I got Somewhere in Time, right? But at that point I was like wondering, where can I find these other songs? So of course the search for the back catalog started afterwards, but the introduction was Live After Death, and I think that and Alive and Exit Stage Left, those were all entry points to those bands that I love. Exit Stage Left was the entry point for me to Rush. Alive was my entry point for Kiss when Jane bought all those albums for me. So again, Jane, thank you so much, because she was my mentor into my musical adventure that I started and continue to this day. So yeah, Live After Death was my entry point.
Yeah, you mention your sister nearly every episode, so it's so strange how, most of us have family members who've had an impact on our musical lives that are part of our stories and soundtrack. My sister certainly is as well, for many things that we listen to, and I know, Lonnie, your brother.
Older siblings are the best, yeah.
And my sister's only 18 months older than me, so. Lonnie, going to you, I mean, what were your initial impressions about the album, or what are the general things that you overall like or dislike?
Well, I love that it's a concept album. I like a good concept album, where everything ties together. Whether it's this, whether it's Welcome to My Nightmare, whether it's The Elder, whatever. I love a good concept album. It's fun, and it just makes every song just almost one almost. So I love the guitar playing, and I know that's just so cliche when we were talking about Maiden, but it's just the harmonics of the guitar playing. Maiden just has a sound that is so unique, and the vocals the guitars and the vocals are just so unique that when it comes on, you just instantly know, oh, that's Iron Maiden. Whether you're listening to a CD or whether you turn on I can't say you turn on the radio, you have to turn on satellite radio to hear Maiden or something like that. But when you hear a Maiden sound, you just automatically know. It's almost like AC/DC. You just know immediately what it is. And this album lives up to that, because it's Maiden really at its finest. So what I like about it is that it is just stamped Iron Maiden. is what I love about it. What I don't like about it, that's going to be tough. Tough for me to say, and I think it's going to be tough for the rest of us to say what I don't like about this album, because it is so good from start to finish.
Yeah, that's going to be the tough thing, to be objectively or constructively critical about an album that, well, I love. I'm not going to probably be able to go there. Ken, what are your overall and, impressions of the album, your general likes and dislikes?
Um, I really like it. I mean, I think it's a great album. As far as for the, there's a couple that I thought are just, songs, but for the most part, I enjoyed it a lot. I would have loved to had they not gone with the synth guitar thing. I think it would have been a little bit less, it create a little bit of heavierness, to it. A little bit more raw. I thought that, the drums were a little, I don't know, the sound of the drums stuck out to me a little bit. That I think they could have been a little bit better like that, maybe the prior album. But otherwise, it was really good. As for concept, yeah, it's loose. I would call it a loose concept album. There's a couple songs in there is like, that doesn't sound like it fits, with the the rest. But I could see tying a whole bunch of them in. Yeah. So it was very enjoyable. I mean, actually surprisingly enjoyable in certain aspects that I hadn't heard before, because I hadn't heard the whole album through ever. I don't think, because I couldn't remember a few of the songs, definitely.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I guess, Mark, to you, your impressions and the things that you like, because clearly I'm not going to ask you to say anything that you dislike.
Well, the impressions of it was I really enjoyed it. I mean, I know that the guitar synth was always a sort of touchy subject amongst guitar players and amongst heavy metal people in general. I refer back to the people that my sister used to hang around with, the jean jacket guys and the cutoff jacket, those guys that were kind of like, it's not this or that. But it was never, that album I found was never as, downplayed as much as some of these other records. Like, when the Kiss thing happened, that was really talked about. When this happened, they were kind of like, a couple of things were pointed out, but not so badly. Like, people really loved Wasted Years, I found. People really thought Stranger in a Strange Land was very cool. I love the album overall. And like you guys, I have a very hard time trying to pick out something that I dislike about it, because to me, this album has always been my headphone album. I love listening to this album on headphones late at night, and it takes me back to, younger days. But the main thing is that it has this kind of vibe to it, the sort of production that they put into it. It reminds me very much of sci-fi stuff for some reason. Must have been mainly because of the synth guitars that gives it a kind of futuristic element to it. Because they didn't try to go for the synth guitars the same way as Priest did. Priest kind of had that whole kind of thing going on, like with Turbo Lover and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with this, they just kind of made it like sound like an extremely chorused guitar, more or less, And they also used regular keyboards as well, which became the norm for them after Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, anyways. But it's such a well thought out record. I never approached this as a concept record. It's interesting that in notes that I saw later on, they said that there is sort of a loose, concept with space and time in it, right? But which I could see. But I think they kind of went more for the concept in Seventh Son than on this album. But this album, it has so much to offer, I think, not only musically but visually with that artwork. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to the album cover, so I'll leave it for that. But this album is one of these things where you can sit there, listen to it for hours, and look at the album cover and discover things that you probably didn't know like the first couple times you looked at it. I mean, there's just so much to offer musically. And I think that if I was to point out anything that kind of, could have been better, I guess you could say, is maybe the overall drum sound was a teeny bit muddy. But, you're in Campus Point in Bahamas. Campus Point, while they did a lot of bands there, it ain't Electric Ladyland.
Did you say Campus Point?
Yeah.
Isn't it Compass Point?
Oh yeah, sorry, compass point. You're right.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Campus,
sorry.
compass.
I would have
Tomato,
believed
tomato.
I would have
Yeah,
believed either one.
yeah, that's what I meant. Anyways, compass point. Sorry. So, but it's not exactly Air Studios or Electric Lady, but a lot of bands go there, and for obvious reasons. The scenery there and the environment to record a record is just absolutely fantastic. Obviously, they moved over to Whistler later to do some of the other stuff, and I believe that they mixed it at Electric Lady, if I'm not mistaken. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, maybe some of the tracks could have had better recording techniques and stuff, but you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. I think it sounds overall very cool for what they were trying to go for with that kind of almost Blade Runner-ish approach visually in your mind when you listen to some of this stuff. Like Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, for example, that song, Somewhere in Time, that song just gives me that whole vibe of that future city and stuff like that. So I think it's really, really well done.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I find as a contrast is the difference between the guitar synth on this album versus Judas Priest Turbo. Now, I don't remember anyone in my kind of circle back in 85, 86 bitching about Judas Priest and the sound. Everyone loved, who I knew, loved Turbo and those videos that were in heavy rotation on MTV, just as much as when Wasted Years came out for this one. I think we were a little bit more set up for Iron Maiden to kind of up the synth because of Power Slave had kind of had elements that were a little bit more textured or orchestral, in the storytelling, that made it a little bit more acceptable than going from Defenders of the Faith to Turbo is one hell of a leap versus going from Power Slave to Somewhere in Time with a live album in between. So that made it a little bit more palatable, or at least it seemed to fit the material a lot more. And if you see Adrian Smith's contributions on this album, for me, his propensity for pop perfection, he can really write a catchy song. And it really shows here, which is probably why Wasted Youth was the perfect first vehicle from it. Let's get into some of our favorites, and do remind me about the artwork, because I did not put that on my notes, and I have my own propensity to forget stuff when we're doing these shows. So, Ken, let's start with you on your favorites. I've asked you for 3 favorites, and whether...
There's only 8 songs.
And there's only 8 songs, and whether it was a difficult task.
Not too difficult of a task. I mean, there are most of the songs, like I said, they're great. There's only a couple that were so for me, but obviously, Caught Somewhere in Time, great song. Love that song. Very melodic. I can really hear what's going on in the song with the bass and so on. So that's a real good one, catchy one. Another one I like is a lot is Heaven Can Wait. I really like that one. It's kind of a frantic type verses that they have, and then it goes into a good chorus. And then I really love on that song, Heaven Can Wait, is the Take My Hand bridge part of the song. And then they go into the, the whoa, whoa kind of thing, which is very cool. So that's a really cool song. And then for a third one, I would say, and I can pick a lot of them, I guess. I'm just gonna say Alexander the Great. It's a kind of epic type song. I like how it builds and then it kicks in, and then it's always for Iron Maiden. I was thinking about it. They're always giving us a history lesson on a lot of their songs on each album. Something to do, whether it's Aces High or a lot of these different songs. They're giving us lessons of history and things that happened in the past. But I think I like on that song definitely it's really long, obviously, but that's about the 5-minute mark. I know it gets into instrumental kind of part and a very cool guitar stuff going on, and then back to the chorus, and So yeah, those are the 3 songs that I think I like the best, at least for now.
Except now we know is an Iron Maiden song, 8 minutes 35 is not a very long Iron Maiden song. We're talking about
They can be
19
longer.
minutes or so. That's a long Iron Maiden
That's a
song.
That's a long.
Yeah. Lonnie, what about your 3 favorites and why?
I'm with Ken. I like Caught Somewhere in Time. It's hard not to pick that as a favorite off the album, just because it is so good, and the way I love the way just that it's a perfect starting song for the album. Just the way the guitars start off, and then it just builds, and that bass just kicks in and just really gets the song moving. It's fantastic, and then obviously it's melodic and very catchy at the same time. And my second one, it's gonna be no surprise, is The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner.
I knew
For obvious reasons. I love that song.
Do you run with it?
I do. And this is and just this album by itself is great to run to, because it is so heavy, and I love running to stuff that is extremely heavy is what I run to. Just stuff that's just gonna kick me in the ass the whole time just to keep me going. And so like Maiden and Metallica and Megadeth and like Rob Zombie and stuff like that are in high rotation on like a running playlist that I have, or if I'm gonna run like 6 miles or something like that, this album's like perfect for that. So I can just listen to this album from like start to finish or something like that. But no, Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner is very near and dear to my heart. So I have to choose that one because it's perfect. And you're out on a Saturday morning by yourself, and you can see no one around you, and you just have no choice but to keep going. It's perfect. And then I'm just gonna be generic, and you're gonna say it's a cop out, but I'm gonna go Wasted Years, just because it is so good, and it's such a Maiden classic that I have a hard time not putting it in my top 3 songs on the album, because it is such an iconic Maiden song.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, picking 3 of this is like very, very difficult for me. Like I said before, this album to me is a perfect playthrough. I've never once in the history of having this record ever skipped anything from this album. But if I had to pick 3 songs, and before I say this, I had to preface this by saying that Adrian Smith needs to be given the tip of the hat. Some of the best writing that he's done, period, in this band occurs on this album, easily, and to think that he's the sole writer on 3 of these songs is just mind-blowing. I mean, considering the fact that Steve Harris is such a control freak in the sense of that he wants to control how the songs are. He doesn't want things to get out of hand. I mean, he is quoted as saying that he thought Bruce Dickinson had lost the plot during the writing of this album, because he was coming in with so many acoustic parts and songs that he's like, no, that's not happening, dude. But to let Adrian come in with songs that are like this, he'd be stupid not to use them as is. So one of them obviously is Wasted Years. I think that it was a fantastic single, great song. It was a song that made me and my bandmates at that early age sit down and not stupidly, I think it really helped us attempt to cover this song when we were very much amateurs at our instruments, but we got pretty far learning it. But it helped a lot. It's a great song, and it taught us a lot about song structure and all kinds of other things as well. The next song I'm going to pick is Sea of Madness. That song has always been a standout to me. I've always loved that whole chorus part in the song. I think it's really well done. The lyrics are really good. I think Bruce Dickinson sings it really, really well. So that's really high on my list as well. And the third song for me is just like Lonnie, the long distance, Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner is really, really standout in my opinion. I mean, that song is so well written. Steve Harris has always written fantastic songs that are 5 minutes and longer. I mean, I think that's his sweet spot. I think anything that's longer than about 6 minutes, he's in his element, as far as writing songs go. So, though, I mean, I could have picked anything from this record, but those are the 3 songs that really stand out to me as songs that, if I wanted to listen to Maiden right now and somebody said you can only pick three, I would definitely pick those three.
That's an interesting bunch of selections. Obviously, Wasted Years for me. Again, first video from it. It was the one that caught your ear. Somewhere in Time. I think simply for the same reason that Lonnie said. It opens the album and it sets the tone for the rest of it. And, you put this thing on repeat. 51 minutes is, for me, perfect length for a walk. And I like to listen to a full album when I'm out on a walk. And, that's like the perfect, time, and coming around the block and the album's over. So, Caught Somewhere in Time really does kick it off well. And then I think I could have gone with Sea of Madness as well. But there's one with some almost blast drumming on it that I think just takes the tempo way up, is way different, is a little bit discordant compared with the rest of the songs on the album. I think it sticks out, Deja Vu. So that one, because it is so different. Some of them are a little bit, mid-tempo-ish. So it's nice to get one that really kind of ups the octane slightly. But Adrian Smith on this album, it's not just Wasted Years. Writing something like Sea of Madness, also Stranger in a Strange Land, it really is outstanding, the songwriting. And I think what you said about Steve Harris and the writing of Loneliness really is true. All right, let's try and do least favorites. And I'm not going to, on an 8-song album, I'm not going to say 3, just 1 or 2. Lonnie.
It's tough. But I'll say Alexander the Great if I had to pick one. And it just, and it's tough to do, but I'll say, because it just doesn't stand out to me as much as the rest of them do. I can't give it as many stars as I do the rest of the album. Even though I like the song, when the other songs on it are so great, sometimes it's hard to live up to it. Even though it's a long song, it's very guitar driven. It's very Maiden-esque. I don't get into it as much as I do the others. So if I had to pick one, I'd say Alexander the Great. If I had to pick 2, that's tough.
It sounds like you're declining to, which is perfectly fine.
I'm going to go with 1. I'm going to cop out and say 1.
All right, Mark. Can you pick one that you think doesn't quite measure up to the rest?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can say similar. Okay, there's 2, and I'll explain this. Alexander the Great, for the longest time, was the one that I liked the least. Now, in saying that, I still love this album beginning to end, and I've never skipped it. But if I was to look at it from the approach of like, okay, Number of the Beast ends with Hallowed Be Thy Name, Peace of Mind ends with To Tame a Land, A Power Slave ends with Rime of the Ancient Mariner, right? And this ends with Alexander the Great. It's, as an ending song, it's not in the same wheelhouse, I don't think, as some of those other ones that I mentioned. But, that's really just making an excuse for why I would put it last, really, because I really do like the song. With that said, a few years back, if we would have did this episode, let's say like 8 years ago, okay, I would have definitely have picked Heaven Can Wait, because there was a time where I had just overheard this song so much. I mean, on the live albums that they did, like Real Live One or Real Dead One, and even some of these other bootlegs that I got, they never performed this song really good live, I found. Their tempos were really abrupt on it. Bruce was all over the place vocally, and whenever they got that, crowd of roadies and stuff like that to do the and that, I don't know, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way for some reason when they did that part with all those people that were like half out of tune when they were singing it. But I love the song on the studio, like this way. I love this song, but because I had overheard it so much in a live capacity and these bootlegs and stuff like that my friends would collect, because my friends were hot into Maiden as well, all my bandmates were and stuff. So if you jump into a car, there was a good chance that going to rehearsal, you'd have somebody play, hey, check out, I got this bootleg from, from Buenos Aires with Iron Maiden, and of course they'd have Heaven Can Wait on it, and I'd hear that song so many times, it would just get on under my skin after a while. But that's then. Now I wouldn't say that. I think I would just stick with Alexander the Great.
Okay, Ken.
Yeah, well, not to get back at anybody here, but
Just we both said Alexander the Great when it was
no,
one of your favorites.
yeah.
So
Oh, it's all right. But the
you're gonna say
loneliness of the long distance runner.
Yeah.
I just didn't think it fit in here. That's the only reason. I think it's an okay song, but it's probably one of my least favorites on the album. The other one would be Deja Vu. The one thing, though, I mean, I like it. It has a cool riff and everything. And I wrote down that this sounds more like a Judas Priest song. That song, to me, I could see Judas Priest doing that song. Which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, the Alexander the Great, yeah, that doesn't really necessarily fit in with the theme of the album. Though I like it, it doesn't really fit in. But I thought, Mark would like it with the, it's got syncopation going on in the middle of the song and some other real cool stuff. But anyway, being a progressive guy, but yeah, that would be it. Just those couple of songs, and I'm not saying they're bad. I said it's just my least favorite on it.
Yeah, so I think it's nearly unanimous because I'm going to say Alexander the Not So Great, because it really is a matter for me that you get a song ending an album like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner on the previous album, and it just works, and that's like 13 minutes long. This is 8.5, and it just seems to go on and on and on. And Alexander wasn't really that great that long. I mean,
He wasn't that great.
it's a very long song for someone who died so young. So it lags, and it's great. I mean, what I do love about Iron Maiden and Steve Harris in particular is that he digs into historic topics to write about, and that's always neat. But it just doesn't work any more than, say, Empire of the Clouds off Book of Souls is something that I want to listen to too often, which some of these songs just don't need to be there. So let's talk about the cover art. How important is that? Because to me, the art almost seems more important than the album itself, just by how everyone seems to spend an awful lot of time fixated on it. I think Eddie on this is one of the best representations, but also very much dated in the Terminator type. Terminator came out in '84, I think.
First one.
And you had Runaway with the the robotic spiders.
Right.
You'd also had Blade Runner by that time.
Yeah.
So it's really riffing off a lot of very popular themes, and that's probably why I like it so much. Plus, with all the elements that do harken back to other aspects of Iron Maiden. Mark, you were the one who kind of brought up the art, so go.
Well, I mean, like I said, the front cover of it is just so fantastic. I mean, the first time I saw it, it was like, it just caught me immediately. But more importantly, I refer to you to the back cover of it, okay? Because if you look there, and if you're a diehard Maiden person, yeah, that's the problem with the '98 CD, is that they have that in there. But if you look at the back here, there are so many indications of Iron Maiden history through here. It's unbelievable. Like the clock, 2 minutes to midnight, right? If you look at the clock time. If you look at this, there's references to all kinds of stuff here. You have like the Ruskin Arms bar, which is the bar that they played at when they were a very young band. That was the name of the bar that they played at. If you look at the soccer scores that are above, the clock there, you have West Ham, Arsenal. Those are soccer teams, very important to the Iron Maiden people. All right. You also have on there like the Aces High bar on there. You have the Long Beach Arena, which is something that was very big as far as the Live After Death album is concerned, right? I mean, if you take a look at the artwork on here, there are so many things in here that just tip off, Iron Maiden history. Live After Death is right there on the movie theater thing, right over the Blade Runner one, right? And I'll say this now, and you're not going to believe this, but I swear on my mother that this is true. I only now today, when I just was talking with you guys and we were doing this, I discovered one thing that I've never noticed about the back cover. I never saw that Doctor Who TARDIS on top of the building there. I was like, that's a Doctor Who TARDIS. What the hell? I never noticed that at all on top of that building that was on there. So again, another British tip of the hat there. And I know that those guys are into that stuff as well. So, I mean, that's what I mean by saying that you can look at this album cover and you could find so many things on here that, refer back to Iron Maiden and their past on there. I mean, the pyramid in the background it's like staring you right in the face. That's from Power Slave, right? So, I mean,
Also
how cool is that? Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
No, I'm saying, yeah, it's a lot of cool stuff on here. I was trying to read up on it. I mean, it has a Spitfire flying over the Aces High bar. Mm-hmm. And then it has the one thing that really caught my eye that I mentioned is that Batman is on here, standing on the ledge on the right side.
Yeah.
If you see his cape's kind of flapping out a little bit, I'm like, oh, someone's a Batman fan.
I think,
cool.
though, I think that's not Batman. I think that's the Phantom of the Opera.
You sure? It looks like Batman to me. I from what I've read, I went back and read. I think they said it was Batman, but anyway.
Okay, it could be. Yeah, I could be wrong, but I just thinking back to their songs, right?
It could be. You're right. Bruce Dickinson has these brains, like for peace of mind, in his hands there. So yeah, there's so much. It's just probably never-ending things and hints and.
There's the Phantom Opera House on the one bridge there.
So what I do recommend, rather than us stumbling through it, is there is on the Wikipedia page for it, there is a list of all the things, and I remember us looking for posters of it back in the day because we wanted to inspect, and you'd be able to see all those things, and you'd spend get the magnifying glass out to try and identify all these things. They are listed on Wikipedia, but Lonnie, anything to say about the cover?
No, I mean, I think Maiden is just known for having great covers. They're all their covers are fantastic, and I think this one is really appropriate for the album itself. Like you guys said, like Julian said, very Terminator-esque on the front, with what was popular at the time in '86. So, I think it's great, and it's like it's a throwback. It's not a throwback. It's 1986, but I mean, you don't hear people talk about just laying in your room, listening to the records, and staring at the album cover the whole time. And this album is a perfect example of that, of just looking at the album, just staring at the album the whole time, whether it's Kiss Alive or something, and just flipping through that booklet and just imagining watching the band. And Iron Maiden is the perfect band, not only for this album, but just in general of staring at your album covers the whole time.
And I think that's the only point I want to make about the album cover is exactly what Lonnie's alluded to. Staring at a CD is not the same as holding that freaking vinyl in your hand and actually being able to appreciate the print quality of the packaging and all the details inherently that are lost in the digital age for people who've got a tiny thumbnail now on their phone. What they're missing out on, if they're not aware of it, is all those details of, when you'd open it up. Did the original have a printed inner dust sleeve? Because I was pure cassettes back in the day. So I never got to see. Oh, yeah. Okay.
And on the other side, and on the other side had lyrics,
Okay. Yeah, that was the downside to me only having, really a cassette deck, because my parents' 1976 turntable was really only good for playing 78s. Not so good on the LPs. But something else Lonnie said, that Iron Maiden always was known for having really good covers. leads nicely into some of the B-sides that were used on the singles. On the flip side of Wasted, you had Reach Out, which was a cover. The god-awful, this is not a good, well, it's not even a cover, The Sheriff of Uddersfield, which has got to be one of the worst just pieces of garbage I've heard associated with Iron Maiden.
Should have been a Seaside.
It should have been on the floor of the cutting room. I mean, I get what they're trying to do with old Rod, but no, don't like it. And then on Stranger in a Strange Land, you had Batgirl and Juanita. Juanita, for me, is probably the best cover, but I do like Reach Out because Adrian, again, gets to sing. Any thoughts on those covers?
Well, I'll just say this, that, and I was a big collector of the 12-inch singles back in the day. I got like Aces High and the 2 Minutes to Midnight one, and they'd have like these B-sides on there. And then the main reason to buy these 12-inch, I might say, is because you had Listening with Nico, Part 1, Part 2, and each single he had a Listening with Nico thing in there. And they were just hilarious. I mean, you couldn't hardly understand the guys, like, hello, no. Like, you could never understand what the guy's saying half the time on those things, but they were fantastic. There's so many great stories. They talked about recording in the studio. And so I highly recommend, if you can find those 12-inch album singles, buy them. They're really excellent. But what I'm trying to get at with the singles is that I found that their singles were decent in the early days. Like when they did like their first couple of records, they had some pretty cool ones, Cross-Eyed Mary. They had a couple of other ones. I Got the Fire and stuff like that. They had some, decent covers that they did back in the day.
Women in Uniform.
Yes. And they even did like a budgie song, and they did some cool stuff back in the day. But as it got later and later and later in their career, their B-sides, I thought, started lacking a bit. They were getting a bit weaker. I mean, this is one of the ones that I just didn't really connect with the B-sides at all. I mean, that Sheriff one is just utter bunk. It's just terrible. I don't know why they put that on there. But, and that's not even the worst. I think there's another one later on in their career they put that's even worse than that.
Next album.
Yeah. And it's just not good. I mean, I understand why they do it, because they are a band that likes to put out singles and likes to put out these sort of, extra material for their fans. Because I'm telling you, like I said, those 12-inch singles, they are worth getting. If I get the earlier ones, they're a lot better if you're looking for B-sides.
Ken or Lonnie, any thoughts on those B-sides?
Not a whole lot. They don't stand out a whole lot. Not much to me. They don't do a whole lot for me. I may have listened to them once or twice, to be completely honest with you.
And that was more than enough. Ken?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't remember listening to them, so I couldn't tell you. And I guess I probably won't listen to them based on what
they're not selling up very well.
Mark, very good job, Mark. Now you just put them off the Sheriff of Uddersfield. So,
damn.
All right. So, last question. Production. Martin Birch. Is it a well-produced album to your ears? Is it sonically pleasing, and does it hold up well to the test of time? Because, we're 35 years since it was recorded and released. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed listening to it. I thought it was, again, I said I would have rather had, a little bit more raw guitar sound, but that's just a nitpicky thing. But I think it stands up because it was enjoyable. It didn't sound to me. I didn't listen to it and say, "Oh, this sounds like 1986." No, that's something more like Crazy Nights or something that that sounds dated to me. So yeah, this sounds good. I think the production was good for what they were trying to go for at the time, and what other bands were doing at the time too. It made sense, but it doesn't sound dated really so much to me.
No, and that's exactly the same for me. You know, every time I play it, I'm not like, oh, this is an old album. It's still like,
Yeah.
this is just the album. But then again, I'm obviously very biased towards it, like I said, about how important it is to me. So I wouldn't want it changed in any way. And I think, you know, the band knew what they wanted to sound like at that point, or Steve knew what he wanted the band to sound like at that point. So, Lonnie, production-wise.
No, I agree. I think it's very intentional for the sound that they were going for. That this is exactly what they wanted, it holds up to this day. It doesn't sound dated like some '80s rock albums do, or that came out in '85, '86, '87. You know, it's not following trends real heavily of the '80s. I think, you know, they're Iron Maiden, and they're proud of who they are, and they like their sound, and they're not changing it every album. Yeah, there's, you know, it's maybe not as heavy as some of their earlier stuff, but I think it has aged well for what it is. It still stands up. It doesn't sound dated or anything like that. I really enjoy it every time I listen to it.
Well, let's ask the producer what he thinks.
Well, I agree with you guys 100%. I mean, I think the one thing with this album that they were going for is that they wanted to go for a futuristic sound to match the sort of artwork that Derek Riggs did with this, and they were lucky. I'll say that they were lucky, because sometimes when you add in things that are modern at the time, like I remember when the whole debate about that snare drum, the gated snare drum that, you know, Mr. Phil Collins and them started developing around the time, when you got that sort of verb on your album, then you were thought to be really cool and hip. You know, you were with the sound. Now you listen to it 20, 30 years later, you're like, oh my God, they had that snare sound. So it's easy to fall into that trap where you follow something that's really popular at the time. They went for something to make them sound futuristic, but they didn't make the sound so dated that when people listen back to it, they go, oh God, this is definitely, like you said, this is an 80s record. So good work by Martin Birch. That they kept enough of the heavy elements in there. They kept Steve Harris's bass sound in there. Nico's drumming is very prevalent on this album. All his tom rolls and stuff like that, they didn't make him cut back on any of these things. It just sounded a little bit more polished, a little bit more, you know, heavier on the chorus. The guitar synths were in there and stuff like that. But, you know, I don't think that I would have changed anything for it. And I think that years and years later now, it sounds just as good to me now as it did the first time I listened to it.
Okay.
I got quickly. I got another question for Mark right there. Do you think that this album was their most accessible album of their career?
Accessible? Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, Iron Maiden and accessible are something that most people wouldn't really say they are.
Right.
But I would say that if there was a time period where they were embraced the most by MTV and Much Music, it was probably this time. I mean, Wasted Years is on all the time, and Stranger in a Strange Land was a video that was played quite a lot. I mean, the album that followed it, you know, Can I Play With Madness, was played nowhere near as much as, you know, Wasted Years and Stranger in a Strange Land. So I think that you might be onto something, that this might be their most accessible point as far as
North America.
You know, yeah, and I mean, if you go on later on, like in South America, I would say albums like Fear of the Dark and stuff like that were huge there, like gigantic during that time period. So maybe they were accessible in South America at that point, but definitely in terms of like TV and video, this is probably their most, yeah,
they're closest getting to kind of trying to approach the mainstream a little bit, without actually going all the way there.
And their sales represent that. I mean, they went gold in Brazil, they went platinum in Canada, gold in Germany, gold in the UK, platinum in the United States. They sold well, you know.
All right, so we may have touched on it for everyone, but favorite Iron Maiden album out of the whole catalog, which is your favorite? I've already obviously said this is mine. Ken?
Well, mine has always been, since I got Power Slave. It's Power Slave. That's kind of been my favorite one.
Lonnie?
It's this one. It's Somewhere in Time.
Mark?
This one.
Nice. Okay. All right, so let's move into the next episode because the votes are in. We had asked listeners and viewers in various places to pick from 4 albums, which were Marillion, Clutching at Straws, LA Guns, Skid Row, Alice Cooper, Killer, for our next episode. So we wanted to do another viewer's pick. And which one do you think didn't win, Lonnie?
Which one didn't win? Mine, Skid Row.
I was actually disappointed that it didn't win because I was looking forward to being forced to actually give that one the time of day because I didn't like it that much back in the day other than a couple of songs. So I wanted to be forced to, listen to it a lot over a couple of weeks. So we might just do that anyway down the road, I think. Because then I get to talk about Slave to the Grind, which I like more. The winner, of course, was Alice Cooper, Killer, which...
fun too, though.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be really fun.
You got something against Alice?
I'm not into Alice. I like $1 Billion Babies. My first Alice Cooper album was Raise Your Fist and Yell. That should say it all. I like more that Zodiac Mind Warp wrote a song for Alice Cooper. Feed My Frankenstein. So Alice. I like Alice when we get to the end of the century. And those
like
two
hard rock Alice.
No, heavy metal Alice.
Yeah, like
Dragontown.
Brutal
Dragontown and Brutal
Planet.
Planet. Those are fantastic. I love those.
Yeah.
But going back to the 70s, some of it, I listened to all of them. I've just finished Flush the Fashion.
Flush the Fashion's a little rough. I'll give you that.
Alice Cooper Goes to Hell.
Zipper Catch a Skin, that's a little rough too.
Yeah, so, I've worked my way through the catalog, like I did last year with Bruce Springsteen's catalog. Because I'd bashed him for years, I sat down and now I find myself, new Bruce Springsteen, I go listen. Yeah. So I wanted to give Alice the time of day. So I am happy in that sense that it will be our next Look It's Rock and Roll. Yeah, I will. That's what the doctor said before my colonoscopy. Yeah, you'll enjoy. All right. There we go. So that's our episode, Caught or Somewhere in Time, Iron Maiden. Mark, thank you for that selection, and thank you to everyone who voted on our picks. We will throw some more options up there in due course. And if anyone's wondering what's happened to the Wasp episodes, they're coming back. We just took a little break needed a break before doing Neon God Part 2. I'm sure you'll understand if you've listened. All right, that's it from the Look It's Rock and Roll podcast, from Lonnie, from Mark, from Ken and myself. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode. Be sure to subscribe to us, like us, or even leave us a review. You can find us and join the conversation on Facebook.